Hey guys, what's up? I'm Jason C, and I am trying to find the history of rye whiskey. I hope I'm at the right place. Let's find out. I was told this is where I find the history of rye whiskey. Am I in the right place?
I believe you are in the right place, so come on in.
Hey, you Bernie Lubbers?
I think I am. My shirt says I am.
Listen, I've been told to come talk to you when it comes to rye whiskey history. Are you the guy?
And I'm told to come talk to you. Are you the guy who wants to know about rye whiskey history?
I am that guy.
All right, man. Bernie Lubbers.
All right, awesome. What's up, guys? I am Jason C. We are here at one of the amazing Heaven Hill visitor experiences, and I'm sitting here with the Bernie Lubbers, the Heaven Hill brand ambassador. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, Jason. How are you?
You ready to get into this thing?
I'm loving it. I'm looking forward to it.
Bernie, tell me a little bit about yourself. How did you become Heaven Hill brand ambassador?
Yeah, well, I was in the industry. I've been in the industry since January 2005. I worked at another distillery just down the road, Jim Beam, and was able to work with Jerry Dalton and Fred Noe there, and worked in a similar role. And over the years, I guess folks at Heaven Hill recognized what I was doing, and they wanted to build an ambassador program here, and they started talking to me, and I've been here now since September of 2012, and it's just been awesome experience.
A lot of changes in the whiskey game, huh? Since 2012?
Oh my gosh, I'll tell you, 2012, 2005, let's talk about 2005 when I started. There were only 10 distilleries in Kentucky and only 2 outside of the state of Kentucky. And today there are 69 distilleries in Kentucky and 2,300 outside of Kentucky.
Yeah, I mean,
look what I've done.
Look, you did this. Like, what are you? So if we go all the way back to the 19th century, rye whiskey really grew in popularity then. Tell us why.
Not just rye whiskey, but whatever you're making.
Yeah.
Whatever you're making and wherever you're living in the world, you make a alcoholic, palatable, potable liquid to drink, because water is the liquid of last resort. There's bacteria. You can get sick of just drinking if you don't trust that water source. So no matter where you are in the world, you're going to make a beer or a wine from whatever grows around you in abundance. So the Northeast is perfect for that. So they had an abundance of rye, a little bit of corn, a little bit of barley, and they're going to make a beer out of that. And then, just like in South Carolina, they're going to make their beers with more rice in it, because there was rice down there, right? So whatever grows around you, you're going to make a beer from. Whatever fruits are growing in the area, you're going to make a wine from. And then it's only going to be about 2 or 3%, so it doesn't last very long. Imagine how long's wine going to last at 2 or 3%, or beer.
Yeah, for sure.
So to make it last longer, it was legal for every person to have a pot still, 50 gallons or less for their personal distillation. You're only going to get a few pints out of that, but it will preserve those fruits when you turn it into brandy from wine, and preserve those grains when you turn it into whiskey from beer. And that's why all over the world, not just in the United States, that was happening.
So is it safe to say that possibly rye whiskey predated bourbon? Or is all that history kind of lost? It's really too tough to tell.
Well, I mean, sure, there could have been a couple people down here at the same time, but the population was more in the Northeast than it was down here. People started moving through the Cumberland Gap here really after the Whiskey Rebellion in 1792. And so that's when a lot of your distillers came down and through here. There's a song about early whiskey making called Copper Kettle, and I love that song. It says, my granddaddy made whiskey, my daddy made whiskey, my granddaddy did too, and we ain't paid no whiskey tax since 1792. And that was not only the year that Kentucky became the 15th state, but that was the Whiskey Rebellion.
Yeah.
That's why people moved from western Pennsylvania down here through the Cumberland Gap, and a lot of them were whiskey makers, and they started making whiskey here. So, yeah, if you want to say rye whiskey predated bourbon, that's fine.
That's fine.
But,
okay.
There's no
timeline specific delineation there,
but where the people were, and most of the population was in New York, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Washington, that area.
So it's so perfect. Kind of leading into that. So we talk about the Northeast in the 19th century. Two major rye producers, two major states. We talk about Pennsylvania and Maryland. Tell us a little bit about why rye whiskey were so popular in those two states and what the differences were. I know you had Monongahela,
Which is fun to say.
Which is really fun to say, which is a little bit of a different type of...
Monongahela.
Am I saying that right? Monongahela?
Sure.
Sure. Which is a little bit of a different than the Maryland style rye, which I think was a little bit sweeter. So get into that a little bit.
Yeah, well, I always go back to what grows in your area. And that's one reason why rye whiskey was popular in that area, because grow. Now, people drank rum, but we had just fought a Revolutionary War in the late 1700s, so rum's going to be hard to get. We just defeated the country that controls all the rum.
Yeah.
So whiskey became the more of the spirit of this country, what it was. The in rye grows in a non-humid climate, right? And that's why in the northeast they have a shorter growing period for corn, so they had less corn and more rye. Wasn't a planned recipe. That's just what they had.
Okay.
When they came down to Kentucky, more corn, a longer growing season, and rye doesn't grow as good in a humid climate. As it comes to the differences between Pennsylvania and Maryland rye, man, we could talk about fist fights and arguments and what it is. And I've heard that Maryland ryes taste more grassy or whatever. Well, rye's a grass. There you go. I think what I've read and what I've heard and reading different things, there were small differences. We know the recipe. Maryland rye that I've heard has had a little more corn.
Yep.
Okay. Now you're moving more south, so that makes sense to me. That makes sense to me, right? You're going to get maybe a little more longer growing season for corn, whatever. And then also I've read that Maryland ryes, some distilleries had a 3-chamber still. Which is a little bit. It's kind of a hybrid. There's 3 chambers inside of a column still, but they're basically similar recipes. Maybe Maryland had a little bit more corn. Makes sense to me. A little more south. I don't know, but there you go.
We went through Maryland. We went through a little bit of Pennsylvania.
Monongahela.
Going a little bit further south. The different recipes. What happened to rye whiskey though after Prohibition?
So just like everything went away.
Yeah.
So you have all these distilleries, some of them come back. You have Continental, Monumental come back in different, in Pennsylvania, in Maryland. Different distilleries come, just like in Kentucky. Who has the wherewithal, the financial wherewithal, and the technical expertise 14 years later to bring it back? And that's what it came down to.
Okay.
There's a lot of them that didn't come back. A lot of them, because some of them are dead. 14 years.
Yeah, long time.
Some of them are too old, and they're just like, I'm not doing it anymore, or whatever. So sometimes it takes youth and experience. It also takes money, and that's where you get a lot of some larger companies that weren't affected by Prohibition, like Hiram Walker and Seagram's that get into the business and they start making or buying distilleries and showing that opportunity. So it just depends on the brand and the state.
That was really where the changing of hands of different brands just started, kind of
all over the country, especially in Maryland, Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Illinois. Starts a huge distilling, because still today in Peoria, you've got a huge rectifier and distillery there.
So Prohibition is repealed, or ends, I should say, December 5th, 1933.
Correct.
And by 1934, a little brand called Rittenhouse Rye popped up.
Yes.
So that's what we have sitting right here, the 100 proof bottled and bond rye whiskey from Heaven Hill. Tell us a little bit about the history of Rittenhouse Rye.
Yeah, well, that starts, like you said, in 1934, Continental Distilling. After Prohibition, they start up, and right after Prohibition, I mean, boom.
Yeah.
I mean, they're hitting the ground.
It wasn't too long after.
Yeah. And so on that, they produce, which is a different name, though, in 1934. It's called Rittenhouse Square Rye. So you see the square on the front of here, the front label?
Yeah.
It's here. Kind of looks like a triangle because it's kind of not, it's kind of on its edge. But that's actually Rittenhouse Square. That's David Rittenhouse. David Rittenhouse mapped out the city of Philadelphia for Mr. Penn, when they were doing that. And Rittenhouse Square, you can go visit Rittenhouse Square today, and that was
Really?
called Rittenhouse Square. David Rittenhouse also helped to mint the first coins for Philadelphia in the United States. So he was a person, actually a real person.
He was a real guy.
Yeah, and that stayed on the label until, I believe, 1948.
Wow.
Rittenhouse Square Rye, it said. So now, ever since then, it's just said Rittenhouse Rye.
Rittenhouse Rye.
And it continued until the late 90s, where it was acquired by Max Shapira in Heaven Hill. And we've had the brand ever since. So
that was 1999, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what about Rittenhouse Rye was so romantic enough that the Shapiro brothers wanted to acquire that label? Do you think?
Well, sometimes in business deals, there's romance goes out the window. This was, I believe, this is probably when Max Shapira and the leadership team, which is 2 or 3 people, I think at the time, Heaven Hill was a smaller company. But today, one of our building blocks and foundation blocks for our distillery is to make every style of American whiskey, and I think this is one of the brands where that started. You can't make every style of American whiskey if you don't have a rye whiskey. The family had this idea that if you bought strong regional brands and then didn't mess it up, it could be part of a great portfolio of brands. So they bought up little brands like Mellow Corn and J.W. Danton, JTS Brown, and all these little brands. Yeah. And it allowed you to not just rely on one brand. You had many strong regional following and fans in different areas.
When you explain it that way, it does make a lot of sense, because you buy up all these smaller brands, they're regional, like you said. You could kind of make your mark, make your footprint. It enlarges your footprint across the United States. That's, you look back at it now, it's pretty smart.
And a brand or two might catch off, and then that tells you what direction you're going. We're going to follow that brand. I always joke that brands are like children. You never know which ones are going to be successful on their own and which ones are going to need help all their life. Right? And so this is kind of what you do.
So what do you say we try some of the Rittenhouse? I mean, we've talked enough about it. Let's get into it, huh?
I'm in agreement.
Okay, let's go. All right, so now to the good part. We have some Rittenhouse whiskey, Rittenhouse Rye Whiskey poured. Tell us a little bit about the mash bill.
Smell grass, don't you? Smell grass?
Of course it's grass. I mean, you said there's grass. So tell us a little bit about the mash bill and...
Yeah, so our mash bill, and I'm sure it's not the original mash bill from Rittenhouse Rye, because there would have been a lot more rye.
Yeah.
Because a lot more rye grows.
A lot more rye grows.
So I've heard this called a Kentucky rye or a barely legal rye when it comes to, because the legal definition of rye from the standards of identity states it must be the majority or 51% rye, and that's what this is.
Correct. 51%.
So this is 51% rye.
Okay.
Rye has more complex enzymes in them, so you need a little bit more malted barley to help break down those complex starches into sugars. So we have dialed up from 12% to 14% in this particular recipe. So there's 14% malted barley, there's 51% rye, and math, that leaves how much corn?
That caught me off guard.
35% corn. There you go. So it's the only recipe where we have more malted barley in the recipe than our bourbons, which is 2% more.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah. So there it is. So from the grains, you're getting the spiciness from the 51% rye. You're getting the sweetness from the corn and the barley. So this is pretty cool because it's about half and half. So it's 51% spicy, 49% sweet. Okay, so that's pretty cool.
And I think it comes off that way in the nose, because I definitely get spice and you definitely get sweet.
Yeah.
It's always been a very balanced, really just solid rye whiskey.
And then the aging. So this is a bottle and bond, and all bottle and bonds must be a minimum of 4 years old. There, very good. There you go. And so this has been aged for 4 years. This is a 4-year-old product.
Okay.
All of our rye whiskeys are aged on floor 4 and higher. So that brings in a little more concentration. It's going to be a little hotter on those higher floors. So it brings a little bit more to the table when it comes to concentration and evaporation. So it's actually going to mimic a little older than 4 years old, although it's not. It's 4 years old.
It's 4 years old.
But because it's on higher floors, we can have that to play with. It used to be aged all over, but Parker Beam learned over years that Heaven Hill Ryes do better 4th floor and higher.
Yeah, I mean, higher floors, more evaporation of the alcohol, a little bit more of a concentration of flavor, so that makes a lot of sense.
And so from the barrel, the flavors you're going to get, of course, vanilla, honey, and caramel. Those are the big 3.
Yep.
Okay? So, and then there's everything else. Everything you're going to smell and taste that aren't those 3 flavors are from your personal experience growing up in your family with your mom's and grandparents' food, and your dad's grilling on the grill, going to school, sharpening your pencil. Does anybody still sharpen pencils? I don't know. And those smells and those
pencil
flavors
shavings.
So all that's you. That's your experience.
Yeah.
But those are the flavors and the smells and the tastes you're going to get.
I mean, that's interesting that you say that, because a lot of folks will ask me, how do I make my palate better? I'm like, you just have to taste things and experience them.
Taste and remember.
It's all personal.
Yeah.
So, cheers, Bernie.
Cheers.
Here we go.
Yeah. First of all, look at the color. I mean, that's a good color. For 4 years old, and that's hitting the back of my palate, right? Instantly in the back of my palate, you get the spice.
It's all, the spice is the first thing.
It's in your face. It is not overpowering, but it is really spice in the back of your palate. A little black pepper. There's some of that stuff's coming through. And then at the same time, though, I'm getting the sweetness and the caramel and vanilla honey right up front.
Yeah.
At the same time.
It's all up
Same
front.
exact time.
All up front is that sweet, and then that spice in the back end.
And then
love it.
In the finish, it's a pretty good finish, pretty decent length of finish. I'm gonna have to taste the second time, and then you're gonna be able, because I think that the second taste is where you always get, because your tongue, it's 100 proof, right?
Yeah,
So
your tongue gets lit up in the first sip, and now that second sip, it's a little bit sweeter, but I gotta say, that finish and the spice just stays. And I think that's a great reason why I think Rittenhouse Rye Whiskey not only is great to sip neat, but it also works great in cocktails as well. Yeah. It really holds up with that spice.
Absolutely, and that's where I wish we could say that it was Heaven Hill's marketing and sales teams that really propelled this brand into the national spotlight, but it was not. It was grassroots from the cocktail communities around the country and the world that in 2010, around then, 2011, I maybe could say 2008 on up, this cocktail culture was really coming up, and you have these cocktail accounts in New York and San Francisco and Chicago and that in New Orleans, and that leads into other cities like Chicago and then your secondary cities and all that having a cocktail culture. When you're going to make cocktails, you're putting in ingredients. Like in a Manhattan, you're going to have sweet vermouth.
Sweet vermouth.
You're going to put it over ice and you're going to stir it, right? And that's going to cause water. Well, if you start with an 80, 86 or 90 proof product, that base spirit might dissipate or disappear with those other ingredients. But when you start with 100 with Bottle and Bond, it's going to poke its head up above those ingredients and say, "Hey, I'm a rye Manhattan, not a bourbon Manhattan," because it's the same 3 ingredients.
Yeah, for sure.
Are you going to taste those subtle differences? Not with an 80 to 90 proof product. With a 100 proof product, it's going to poke its head up above those ingredients. And it was the cocktail bartenders and the mixologists that wanted Rittenhouse Rye, told us that's what they wanted. And that's when we took notice. And because we're a family-owned company still, we could adjust quicker than a lot of other companies and really give them more Rittenhouse Rye.
Yeah, I think the cocktail culture and what it's done for rye whiskey just in the last 5, 6, 7 years has been astronomical, and how creative cocktails has gotten, the different spirits being used. And I think rye whiskey, part of the almost revival of it in the last 10 years has been because of the cocktail culture.
Yeah. And so it's a bartender darling. If you go to anywhere, it's not the #1 selling rye in the world. It is what I call the most sought after rye whiskey in the world. And I think it's cool to be the most sought after rye whiskey in the world. And that's my term. You might disagree. That's okay.
Yeah.
But that's mine.
That's pretty cool. Well, cheers to that.
Cheers.
Let's have one more sip of this, and then I want you to tell me about another rye we have up here. All right, so we just talked about Rittenhouse. I want to talk about one of my favorite ryes on the planet from Heaven Hill, and that's
by
Pikesville.
magic we have now
Which
in these
by
glasses.
magic, by the magic of
We
editing,
didn't see it being poured,
but they're here.
but it's
but it's here. So we talk about Pikesville. Now, Pikesville was a Maryland-based brand. If you go all the way back to the 1890s.
1895.
1895.
Started by L. Wineland and Brothers.
Okay.
In Scotts Level, Maryland.
Scotts Level,
Scotts
Maryland.
Level. 2 words, Scotts Level.
Level, Maryland.
But they thought that sounded too much like Scotch. So they named it after nearby Pikesville.
Okay.
And so, cool start right there, right?
Yeah, well, there you go.
Distillery's not even in Pikesville, but they named it after it. So I think that's cool history. And it's been there since
sure.
1795. It was disrupted only, of course, by Prohibition. And then after Prohibition, it comes back, made by another company and sourced at Monumental Distilling them. They didn't have their own distillery, but it was made at Monumental. It changed to Majestic after an incident.
Oh, Majestic, I've heard that
Yeah,
name.
Majestic.
Majestic.
Great name for a
Great
distillery.
name for a distillery, absolutely.
And then in 1982 was acquired by Heaven Hill. I hear the story that the owners of Pikesville called Max Shapiro themselves and said, we're going to have to sell. And but we'd rather sell to you because you won't kill the brand. So this was, a lot of people think that Rittenhouse Rye is our first rye whiskey, but no, because it was more national and more well known. But this, because it stayed really only in the Baltimore and Washington, D.C. and that whole area. This was our first rye whiskey, and actually Rittenhouse Rye is a offshoot of that. And so it's a great whiskey. It was a 4-year-old 80 proof product, pretty much poured in every bar in Washington and Baltimore and all that area. It was the local rye.
Yeah,
I mean, it was the only Maryland existing distillery to last. I mean, that's something. In 1982, it made it all the way. Every other Maryland rye went out of business.
Which is phenomenal when you think about all the Maryland ryes that were alive and well pre-Prohibition.
It kept the torch going.
It somehow
right?
kept itself going.
And Max Shapiro and Heaven Hill has kept it going since.
I mean, amongst whiskey geeks and bourbon geeks and rye whiskey lovers, Pikesville is probably always recognized as one of the favorites every single year.
Yeah.
Along with Rittenhouse. So, same mash bill?
So, same mash bill, 51%, 35% corn, 14% malted barley.
We're still aging on the
Fourth
top
floor and higher.
Fourth floor and higher.
Number 3 char barrels, but this has an additional 2 years from Rittenhouse Rye. And then an additional 5%
a little bit
proof,
bumping
so
the,
110 proof instead of
110
100.
proof. Yep.
So those aren't small changes. Those are significant change. 2 years in a higher floor is a significant change.
Huge difference.
And then 110, that's a that's
All right, well,
a
let's get into this one.
Cheers.
Yeah, let's cheers this one. Here we go.
So the smell, the aroma.
This brings you into a darker place than the Rittenhouse, like in the best way possible.
Yeah.
I mean, this one gets a little bit more baking spicy to me. Start getting a little bit of the cinnamon to go along with that really nice rye
Those
spice.
experiences are coming out.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
when you say baking spice, was your mother? Was she?
It was my grandma. I talk about my
grandma?
grandma a lot. She taught me how to cook.
Yeah.
And I get most of my tasting notes come from her because she kind of helped me develop my palate and that recognition from flavor to my brain to be able to express it. And I think that's what the beauty of it is.
Right. And then the taste.
Oh man,
There's that spice, and it's even, I think, presented itself even stronger. But at the same exact time, that sweetness of the corn and the caramel and the vanilla. Boy, that vanilla really comes through.
The vanilla really ramps up. Absolutely.
On the front of your palate at the exact same time. And then you got that 110. It doesn't even taste anywhere close to 110 proof.
It doesn't.
You
mean,
know?
you get the rye spice, and usually if something drinks hot, you kind of feel it all like here in your chest. This kind of just hangs around right in the back of your palate. Kind of that linger. I call it the Pop Rocks effect. You ever have Pop Rocks?
Absolutely.
You know, and just kind of like pops in your
Yeah.
mouth, just back and forth. That's what I feel like I'm getting here.
How about that mouthfeel? I mean, that's totally different. That's more viscous.
Way more viscous. This is just a sit back, relax by the fire type of rye whiskey.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely.
Be by the fire with a cigar. You could also a great dessert. It would go great with a wonderful bread pudding or you name it.
That elevated sweetness. It really does come off very desserty, I think.
You know, this would be good. One of my favorite things is putting whiskey over ice cream.
Oh.
And this would be great over like a chocolate chip ice cream. Huh?
Whiskey over ice? Why haven't I done this yet?
Oh, you put it in a wine glass? You've never done this?
I have not.
Next time you're asked to bring a dessert, say I got you. You don't have to bring the glasses. Everybody's got wine glasses.
I've made like sauces for steaks with bourbon.
Just bring a half a gallon of good ice cream.
Okay.
And then you put a couple scoops in a wine glass. You don't have to bring those. They got them, right?
Okay.
And then you bring the whiskey and you pour it over, and you're done.
Oh, this is genius.
And then, bring a cookie and put it in there if you want. You know, if you want to get it.
And top it off with a cookie.
And it's all but there's vanilla in the ice cream, right? There's
everything that
complements it. After COVID and all that, we had some supply issues. I think that even helped this brand because it went away a little bit. Glass issues and supply, and just like you want what you can't get. Pappy Van Winkle used to say that, right?
That's right.
Make the best whiskey, keep it in short supply. I think that really catapulted this brand into people's not even seeing it anymore and not be able to get it, and now they want it even more.
That totally makes sense because I'm from Ohio, and I remember during COVID, right after COVID, I was like, "What? Where's the Pikesville on the shelf? Like, I need my Pikesville." Couldn't find it. Finally came back, and I grabbed it as soon as I saw it. But this is one hell of a.
So don't forget it.
Yeah, don't forget
about it. This
it.
reminds us just how good this is, right?
Yep. No, cheers to that.
Cheers.
All right, look, magically again, we have new glasses.
We do. With different whiskey in it.
With different whiskey in it. And we're going to get into another big name synonymous with Heaven Hill, which is Elijah Craig. Maybe more so known for being the father of bourbon.
Absolutely.
But back in 2020, Heaven Hill released an Elijah Craig Rye Whiskey, straight rye whiskey.
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about the birth of this one. Why bring an Elijah Craig Rye to market? What was the idea behind that?
Well, sometimes you got to look at what's going on in the whole category. So we had a lot of brands at competing distilleries that were small batch bourbons that had a rye variant, and so it just made sense to leverage the name of Elijah Craig, which has become the number 2 selling small batch bourbon, I believe.
Yeah, just a little well-known name in bourbon.
Yeah,
just
and
a little bit
using that leverage. And people knowing and trusting the name of Elijah Craig, and that he is the father of bourbon, and with the charred barrels, he had a barn fire, and we don't know what started the fire, but he was able to put the fire out, and that's how charred barrels came into his world.
Yeah.
And so that story continues through, and we have Elijah Craig Rye, and so again we make distillates at Heaven Hill Distillery at the Bernheim facility. Connor O'Driscoll, our master distiller, and his team make distillates. This is the rye distillate, same distillate as Pikesville and Rittenhouse, but the age and proof is different. So totally different than Pikesville and Rittenhouse.
Yeah.
So let's see what that difference.
Let's see what those differences are.
Because the distillate's the same, but the age and the proof, that's different. So what do you think the nose? How do you think that's presenting itself differently? It's a little softer.
It's definitely a little softer, and this one, what I wasn't really getting in the other two, this one is coming up a little bit more citrusy to me.
Oh, yeah, that's fair.
I'm definitely picking up a little orange peel in here. That spice is there.
Sure, coming through there, and then on the taste. Let me tell you that the spice isn't as pronounced.
It's not
in the back of the palate.
Yeah,
and then some of those baking spices are coming through.
Yeah, it's definitely sweeter. I think the baking spice are there. It's a little bit more citrusy.
I get more of a cinnamon.
Citrus and cinnamon. This is like a Christmas
cinnamon
rye.
spice.
It's like a Christmas type rye.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's take that second taste, because to me that's the transition taste, as I call it.
I got a little bit more spice on the second sip.
Yeah,
but it's still very sweet.
And so that's going to be your extra aging, is bringing different flavors to the table.
So as you kind of look across the entire landscape, just these three, even though it's the same mash bill, they're all presented very differently, which I think
and 94 proof.
And 94 proof.
Yeah. So there's that orange really coming through.
That orange is probably the most prevalent for me.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so just three awesome expressions, and you might if I told you they were from 3 different distilleries, you might believe it.
You could.
You know, and that's
might.
the magic and the experience that we have of being almost 90 years in the business is to figure out, you know, cheers to Parker Beam for figuring out we need to put these on 4th floor and higher. And it would be a whole different experience if we had 1st, 2nd, and 3rd floor along with it.
For sure.
And who knows, we could have some down there. We could, because you know, that's where we like to put anything that's really extra aged.
This is where we put a bleep in the video. Beep. No, I'm only kidding.
Oh no, that's the beauty of it. That's because we're always experimenting, and that's one thing you can experiment with. This position in the rick house.
I mean, that's a master distiller's playground in there, messing around with different rick houses, where you're going to age it, blending of barrels. Absolutely.
So that's how we can come up with 3 totally different expressions with 3 totally different brands, and still have the thumbprint of the same distillate.
So because of the 3 distinct bottles you have, the Rittenhouse, the Elijah Craig, and the Pikesville, and like you said, if you kind of tasted them, you might think they're all from 3 different distilleries, and I think that's helped you with winning a certain amount of awards for all 3. Want to tell us a little bit about those?
Well, my theory on awards, I don't know about yours is, okay, but we all leverage the when we win awards. But I always say that nobody cares about awards until you win them, right? All of these have won golds and double golds and whiskeys with this and whatever. That's fine. That shows that there are panels, not just one judge, but there are panels that all agree that these are great whiskeys. The only thing that matters, though, are these good enough to go out and buy? And I think all 3 of these have won the award of, I think I'll go out and buy a bottle of each and give it, and let us know what you think. First of all, is it worth the money that you paid for, which I think they all are.
They all are, because they're all affordable. They're all pretty attainable.
Are they award-winning in your world?
That's what matters. That's what matters. It's not, I mean, you could go out, sip them, we can only tell you so much, but when you try them, you'll probably win your own personal award because they are that good.
And let us know where you rank them in your world, whatever. But I think they're damn good.
These are, I mean,
and all different.
I cannot remember the Elijah Craig Rye being that citrusy. I absolutely love it. All right, so now that we've tried all 3 of these delicious rye whiskeys, I want to kind of take it back to Rittenhouse a little bit, because this is a bottle that I haven't had in a long time.
Yeah.
So what can you tell us? What's happening next with Rittenhouse?
Well, as I told you before, Rittenhouse was a grassroots effort that started by the bartending community back, more than a dozen years ago. And I think people haven't really seen it in their local liquor store. And I think you're going to see more and more of Rittenhouse in your local liquor store shelves. So look for that. And it's also because it's such a bartender darling, we came out with a larger size, a liter size for Rittenhouse.
Oh, the big liter of the Rittenhouse coming out.
And then the others, we're just going to go with you all. And as you all enjoy them and are able to tell us what you like more, you'll hopefully see them more and more.
Well, that's amazing. Well, Bernie, I can't thank you enough for walking us through all this amazing history, tasting through these bottles.
My pleasure.
It was an absolute pleasure.
My
it
pleasure.
was really, really great meeting
Thanks for having me on your show.
Absolutely. Yeah. And guys, I'm Jason C. from the Maryland Drum Whiskey Room. Guys, hope you enjoyed this. Please like, subscribe, do everything you need to do. Check out the video. Check out all these great products from Heaven Hill. And as I always say, it's not about the whiskey. It's the people you share it with. Like people like Bernie Lubbers, who just taught me to pour whiskey in my ice cream. I'm totally doing that. Cheers, buddy.
Cheers, man. We'll see you.